Okay, there we go. I think we made the adjustment. Manjesh, Bhakti and Carol, let us know if the volume is improved, and tell me what you've got. At any rate, as I was saying, through the kind donation of one of our viewers in the Krishna.com land of viewers, yeah, much better. That's good. Yeah, we've got our original equipment back up and running, and we want to remind you, of course, that we're able to broadcast these programs by the kind hosting of the Krishna.com devotees who daily facilitate all the different options that we see, whether it's reading Prabhupada's books or ordering things from the store or tuning into the webcams in our local temples to see the deities and hear the kirtans from our own home. So if you would like to help out with that program, you just go to krishna.com/donate, and that will show you where you can also be an active supporting member of this worldwide Krishna.com movement, which brings you programs like Lives of the Vaishnava Acharyas. So, the name of our program, Lives of the Vaishnava Acharyas, it indicates that we're speaking about those persons who have passed away before us, who have come and gone, if you will. Those who have left something noteworthy in the way they lived their lives, something that's beneficial to us. Those who were an example on the path that we hope, that we aspire, and that we try to follow in the footsteps of. Usually in our talks we go back 300 or 500 years discussing the immediate associates of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and the subsequent generations of devotees that came immediately following in the line of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his followers, and giving us an opportunity to see that window of time. Yet, from time to time, we are faced with, shall we say, history right before us. This past week was such a circumstance. We have lost the valuable association of two of Srila Prabhupada's determined followers. Two devotees that at a very young age dedicated their life to Srila Prabhupada and served his mission in a very tangible way, which we can easily see as an example to ourselves. Now, the interesting thing about speaking of these are devotees of my own era. One of them, Vichitravirya Dasa, factually speaking, unless one was part of the British Yatra or connected with the British Yatra, one wouldn't know who Vichitravirya was. And the other one, Aindra Prabhu, I think there's hardly anyone in ISKCON who isn't familiar with Aindra. You couldn't help but know who Aindra was. So tonight I'm going to try and speak a little bit about these two. As a result of these devotees having passed away, this past week has been a very contemplative week, one of a lot of thoughts and realizations for me personally, because I knew both of these devotees. I've had devotee friends depart from this world already. That's just the fact of life. But these two particular devotees, and in specific Aindra Prabhu, I think had a larger impact on me because of my personal friendship with it being deeper, but because they both gave something directly to Srila Prabhupada and were noted for that throughout the world. These are, as I mentioned, these are friends from my own era, people that I know, and I've discussed with a few devotees that we can actually expect that the next 10 or 15 years of our society's movement will bring about these types of events, of the passing of so many devotees that did so much for Srila Prabhupada at such a young age and throughout the rest of their life. I've often spoken about how the lives of our Vaishnava Acharyas, sometimes there's very little information known about them. The fact is that, generally speaking, when devotees take to the path of devotional service, they're not so much interested to speak about their previous life. Even Srila Prabhupada, you had to kind of draw it out of him. Now, when the opportunity was right and the conversation was suitable, there would be animated conversations, and Prabhupada would tell about his childhood and about his college years, and, he was very happy to share this information with his disciples. And I'm sure that in the times of the Goswamis and these devotees, that there were circumstances where, as friends, they would sit and talk about the old days, so to speak. Not with the same mentality or consciousness that we do by any means, but their lives that brought them to the point of surrendering to Mahaprabhu. How else would we know that when Gopal Bhatta was a young boy, he had the opportunity to serve Mahaprabhu in his own home, his father's house, Venkata Bhatta? How else would we know that Rupa and Sanatan were imprisoned and had to make all these arrangements, So in this way, I think it's an interesting perception that, we actually don't always have information. And now we have two devotees, as I mentioned, from our own time period, and actually very little information is out there about them. Now, with the exception of Vichitravirya Prabhu, some of the parts of his life have been very wonderfully described. There's a book, I don't know if any of you have it or not, it's called When the Sun Shines. And this book is the history of the British Yatra, written by Ranchor Prabhu. Ranchor is a disciple of Srila Prabhupada that has written quite a bit, and has an amazing ability to search out detail and then present it in a very enticing format. So this book he's written, When the Sun Shines, is very, very wonderful, and gives great history about many of the prominent and senior players in the British Yatra. It's also an invaluable resource for the history of ISKCON. Of course, if you talk about the British Yatra at the beginning, you have to talk about how the devotees went there and where they came from, and that leads you to America and Prabhupada coming like that. So, I'm just hoping that down the road, other skilled and, expert writers will do similar things on the history of our ISKCON society. Vichitravirya's life is laid out there at that point. Yet in Aindra's case, we don't seem to find as much information, but of course I'm hoping as time goes on that different devotees that know this information about him will come forward and details will be filled in and the storyline will become a little bit more complete. But, like I say, these gaps, if you will, became a little easier for me to understand as I tried to think about these devotees and their early parts of their life, before maybe I met them, or before, I became so close with them, and, or maybe when there wasn't opportunity to sit and talk about these things. So, at any rate, tonight we're going to speak about these two devotees, Vichitravirya and Aindra Prabhu. Now, Vichitravirya was living in England. He was born there. His name was Ian Cheverton. And throughout all of his life, he had been a part of the alternative youth movement in Cardiff, England, and had been interested in other than mainstream pursuits, both spiritually and in his own personal life. He was one of the few younger friends at that time that he had that actually had an actual job. I mean, I'm sure in England, as it was in the States, many of us didn't have jobs. We just were hippies, vagabonds, whatever words you want to use. But at any rate, he actually held a job as a chemical engineer at British Steel. And in the spare time that he had, he sang in a band and pursued his main interest, which was to study Eastern philosophy and chant different mantras that he would come across, with the specific hope that by chanting these mantras, he would uncover the understanding of God. So here we have what we see as a similarity in many devotees' lives. an interest in understanding what is my relationship with God. So, he had a wide circle of friends who respected him because of this as an authority on spiritual subjects. And when questions would come up, his opinion would be taken seriously as like the definitive answer, because he was well read and he was very sober in his thinking on these matters. So after some time, he met one of the British devotees at the time, Kulashekhar. Kulashekhar is one of the early disciples of Srila Prabhupada in England at that time. And they were chanting, Kulashekhar was there with the devotees chanting in the streets, and he immediately felt a kinship with them and was attracted to the devotees, and so would regularly go to hear them chant. And after the devotees, at that time they didn't have a temple, they were moving about from place to place, and so they were on the tail end of living in one person's place, and so Ian helped them to find another location where they could all live together. This was what they were trying to do, was find a place where they could actually rent space and be together as a temple. So through this association, through being with them, through talking with them, he decided, this is what I'm looking for. This is my goal in life. This is my answer. So he decided he would join the devotees. So that Christmas, he spent one last Christmas, as it describes, with his family around the sacred holy Christmas tree, somewhat different than the holy Tulsi tree, but around the Christmas tree, and made his peace with his family and friends, and then he moved into the temple, and that was that. That was the beginning of his commitment to devotional life. Now, after some time of living in the temple, Ian, as he was known then, he did numerous services. At that time, he just did whatever was necessary. And in 1973, the main Rath Yatra in London, the real big Rath Yatra, was organized. And this is the one where they had a very professional cart with expert wheels. The first one they did, the wheels fell off, and they had problems like that. So this was a very wonderful program. It was held at the Trafalgar Square in front of the statue of Lord Nelson, and very, very big thing. And at that 1973 Rath Yatra, Srila Prabhupada did a public ceremony for initiation, which was interesting because the devotees, actually, the story goes, they didn't have a permit for a fire. So the policeman inquired what was going on, and the devotee in charge, I forget what the name was, said, well, we're going to light a fire. And he said, a fire? And the devotee said, no, just a couple of candles. We're going to light a couple of candles. Oh, all right, that's all right. You can light a couple of candles. Well, in no time, Pradyumna had this full blazing fire with mantras chanting, and you got to have a pretty good-sized fire. You get 22 devotees throwing grains in there. And the policeman was making notes in his book, and everything like that. So at any rate, at that time, Ian Cheverton became known as Vichitravirya. Now, there's a really nice example. The devotees at that time, as we mentioned sometimes, they had a greater access to Srila Prabhupada than we did in the later years. Sometimes we did. I was fortunate to get some of that. But in the earlier days like that, it was much easier to have association with Srila Prabhupada. So one night, it explains how that Vichitravirya was sitting out in the hallway outside of Srila Prabhupada's room, and he was just sitting there in the darkness chanting. It was like 2 o'clock in the morning. Now, as you all know, that you're familiar with Prabhupada's schedule, and with Prabhupada's schedule, that he would get up very early in the morning, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, like that. So he had gotten up early and had gone out of the room to the bathroom. And when he came back, it mentions that he saw Vichitravirya there. He was sitting there in the early morning chanting his japa, just in the dark there outside of Prabhupada's room. And he was actually taken surprise when Prabhupada came out. He didn't know that Prabhupada would be up that early. And Prabhupada went in the shower. He stopped and offered his obeisances. And when he came back, when Prabhupada came back, he offered his obeisances again, but Prabhupada stood there and waited until Vichitravirya was finished and got up and looked at him, and Prabhupada looked directly into his eyes and he said, sincerity of purpose, that is what is required. And then he went into his room. So Vichitravirya Prabhu took this as a personal instruction from Srila Prabhupada. But how much more personal it could be? Prabhupada looked right in your face and said this. So this was something he carried with him. Sincerity of purpose, that is what is required. And you can apply that in so many ways, but particularly to the principles of spiritual life. So Vichitravirya, he cherished these words throughout the rest of his life. He wasn't quite sure at that point as a young man what Prabhupada meant, but he knew these were important. And, this was something he would never forget. Now, I'm just interrupting here because I see in the chat room they're asking, how do you spell Vichitravirya? So, Manjesh, you've asked, so I'm going to spell it for you. Vichitravirya. Vichitravirya. Just like it sounds. Vichitravirya. Okay. So, at any rate, after receiving those instructions, for the next couple of years, at that time, Bhattinandana Prabhu came to England, and he was coming from the West Coast, very, very, very fired up and enthusiastic devotee, and he was put in charge of the preaching, the Sankirtan. And so he got together a three-man crew, himself, Bhumadev, and Vichitravirya. And these three traveled for 2 years throughout all of England, to the schools, to the colleges, to youth clubs, and so on, selling Prabhupada's books, doing kirtan, but mostly selling Srila Prabhupada's books. Then in 1974, I'm sorry, I said for the next 2 years. It was for the next 2 years Bhattinandana traveled. Vichitravirya didn't travel with him that entire 2-year period. He traveled in the beginning, and then after traveling for some time in 1974, near the end of 74, he was asked to take over the management responsibilities at the Bury Street Temple. By that time, of course, the devotees had been successful in acquiring the temple in Bury Place, and the management had gone through a few different devotees, and they wanted someone local, someone responsible. And Vichitravirya, as I mentioned, he had a degree in chemical engineering, so he was seen to be an intelligent devotee. So he was asked to take responsibility for the Bury Place Temple. And this went on for some time. Late in 1974, the Bury Street Temple, if you read this book, this is all given in great detail. The Bury Street Temple had some very serious legal challenges from some of the people in the neighborhood and from the local authorities. So they enlisted the help of one Indian gentleman who was a barrister, a lawyer, and Vichitravirya, along with the assistance of Mukunda, they spearheaded, if you will, the fight to overcome these legal battles. And this was going on at the height of the Christmas Marathon. And all the devotees were going out and distributing books and chanting the holy names. And Mukunda and Vichitravirya were steadfastly every day dealing with these legal issues and sorting out all this difficulty like that. So this was what was going on. After that, the autumn of the following year, the management of the Bhaktivedanta Manor was handed over to Vichitravirya. And for the next 3 years, he would serve there as the temple president. No small feat. Big property. I mean, those of you that are familiar with the manor, even back in the early days, they would get 10, 20, 30,000 guests for Janmashtami. Now, of course, I've heard numbers like 300,000 or 400,000 come through there over the Janmashtami weekend. I mean, an amazing number of people. But they would arrange this. So he was the president at that time, taking such a major responsibility for Srila Prabhupada. 1978 was the final visit of Srila Prabhupada. I'm sorry, 1977, excuse me. 1977 was the final visit of Srila Prabhupada to the manor in London. And at that time, Prabhupada's traveling condition, his health, was not very suitable for the type of traveling he was doing. And while in London, the diabetes that he was suffering from caused some complication in his health, and he had to be rushed to the hospital for some minor surgery to relieve some pressure in the body. some of the bodily functions. And at that time, Tamal Krishna Maharaj was with him, and Vichitravirya, and the screen just went dead. Ah, there we go. Whew. Screen blacked out on me. I freaked out. At that time, Vichitravirya and Mukunda and Upendra, the three of them. Actually, I'm sorry, it wasn't Mukunda, it was Abhiram. Mukunda had left London by that point. It was Abhiram. Tamal Krishna Maharaj was with Prabhupada, actually went into the operation arena with him, and Vichitravirya, Abhiram, and Upendra, who was Prabhupada's servant, all waited there at the hospital and waiting for the results like that. So then, of course, we know that Srila Prabhupada's departure took place, and from there, the history of Vichitravirya is not very clear, except that after some time in the early 90s, he and Abhiram Prabhu came to Key West to start some business venture there. I remember in the 90s was when many devotees were starting small communities of devotees at that time. Myself, I lived with 3 or 4 other families in southwest Florida. Abhiram and Vichitravirya and their families and a couple others lived in Key West. It was more common that devotees were starting to branch out and start small programs like this where they were living wherever it might find them. So Vichitravirya was very, very successful in business, so much so that he came to the attention of some of the 5-star hotel companies down there, and they enlisted him, hired him to manage their facility there. And he was very successful and very well respected. Unfortunately, shortly after that, he was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, MS, which is a very debilitating disease that gradually becomes much worse. And after a few years of this, when the disease became very intense, he relocated and moved back to England, where his children were, and finished his last days there. His children were there with him and took care of him. Actually, his children were said that they learned more about Krishna consciousness in the final days, in the last few months of their father's life, than anything they'd learned throughout their whole life. So, in this way, he departed this world as every Vaishnava desires to depart this world, surrounded by devotees. So, this is a devotee who took up a major responsibility on behalf of Srila Prabhupada's movement. We know from the readings of Prabhupada's writings and from his letters how proud he was of the successes of his devotees in England, and how important he felt that the English yatra was, in lieu of the fact that some of his sannyas godbrothers had gone there and not been as successful as some of his householder disciples. And he was very proud of this and very appreciative of the devotees who did so much there and rendered such wonderful service there. So in this way we know that very significant pleasure was given to Srila Prabhupada by Vichitravirya, and that we can understand that certainly he has been brought back to Srila Prabhupada's feet to continue to please them. I'd like to speak about Aindra Prabhu. Aindra grew up, came to Krishna consciousness from the Baltimore, Washington, D.C. area. Once again, very little is known about his life prior to being a devotee and his early years. He did mention one thing. Of course, anybody that would spend any time or hear Aindra could understand what an amazing musician he was. To the compositions, the tunes, the musical arrangements, very amazing. So one might ask, where did he get this interest, this training? So he relayed the story to devotees that his initial interest in music came from a rather unusual source. His father, when he was a child, his father owned a banjo. And when his father would retire to the bathroom to take care of his business there, he would take his banjo in with him, and while doing what needed to be done, he would play on the banjo. Now, in the Western culture, it's not uncommon that people take things of entertainment or amusement into the bathroom with them. Many Western homes you go, there's a book rack in the bathroom. Or, you know, they spend some time in there. Vitthalanatha referred to the toilet as you do your business and get out, of course. This is our Vaisnava training. But in the Western world, it's a bit different. It's commonly referred to a bit humorously as the throne. So, at any rate, his father would retire in there to take care of what needed to be done and take his banjo with him and play it while he was in there. And Aindra Prabhu would sit outside the bathroom door as a young child and listen to this music that his father was playing. And he said that that was where his initial spark, his initial interest in playing music came from. After some time, he took up musical training properly, and then in due course of time, in due course of time, he actually came to Krishna consciousness. He actually joined in the Baltimore, D.C. temple area at that time in 1973. And he was initiated by Srila Prabhupada, into Srila Prabhupada's following at that same year in 1973. And after he received his Brahminical initiation, shortly after that, he continued for some time as the pujari in the D.C. temple, Washington at that time. And regularly, it mentions that he would always go out on Harinam. That the Harinam Sankirtan and the Pujari service were the two main activities of Aindra at that point in his devotional life. After some time, he left the D.C. temple and joined the Radha Damodar buses. And during his time on the Radha Damodar buses, he would regularly go out to the colleges, to the summer fairs, the state fairs, to the parking lots, and distribute Srila Prabhupada's books. Not so much opportunity was there for him at that time for performing Harinam. It was mostly the book distribution. And this went on for some time. I met Aindra in New York in the 80s. I don't know exactly what the transition was of how he got from the Radha Damodar bus party to New York, but he was staying in New York, and we developed our friendship when the temple was located on Skirmerhorn Street. At that time, he had a set of small Gornitai deities that he was worshiping, that he'd been worshiping for some time. And he shared a realization with me that he had. He explained to me that he had experienced some difficulty in pursuing his devotional service. He was not specific, but he indicated some difficulty that he was having trouble settling in his mind. And he said he realized that by taking shelter of his deities and by serving them, all these difficulties of the mind and all these difficulties of the senses and all these difficulties of being in the material world would be completely dissolved. And this was his realization from an early time. So he had these very sweet little Gornitai deities he would worship. Now, at that time in New York, devotees, of course, like to go out on Harinam, but to go to one place and sit on the sidewalk and perform Harinam, as Aindra wanted to do with multiple instruments and, you know, a setup and speak, it just wasn't possible. The permits wouldn't be given to you. And to walk around on walking Nagar Sankirtan, well, that was also difficult for all of this equipment. So Aindra, I believe personally that this was the time it was when his passion for the holy name really began, and he started fueling the fire of bhajan at this time. He developed this amazing, innovative concept. He got a panel truck, a box truck, if you will, that opened on the side. Some of these box trucks, they open the back, you go in like that. But this was a particular design, and it had folding doors and opened up out on the side. And then by hand, he mixed together different resins and molds, and he made this facade of a temple, an archway. There were 3 parts to it, 2 parts that went down sides, and then 1 part that was an archway across the top. And it was decorated with peacocks and different temple designs and swirls and floral looking things and all. And it was absolutely amazing. And he would store this inside the truck. On top of the truck he mounted a winch. And he, on the back of these facade pieces, he had hooks embedded in them. So he would bring them to the front of the opening on the side. He would take this winch, hook them on, and then hoist them up and mount them on the side of the truck. And in this way, he had what looked to be a temple. Inside, he decorated the floor very beautifully, like most temples were, with that black and white colored tile. And he had a wonderful altar set up, and on that altar were his most beautiful Gornitai deities. He had his sound system in there, harmonium, tempura, mridanga, kartals, everything was there. And on the side doors that folded out, once the facade of the temple was put in place, there were book displays that came down on hinges off of that side with displays of Srila Prabhupada's books. So what Aindra would do was, early in the morning, he would drive to some place in Manhattan that he wanted to spend the day at. He would pick a particular area or district, and he would pull up to a parking meter. And with a mere handful of change, he would sit at that parking meter all day long, just feeding quarters into the meter as the time ran out, open up his truck, pull out this facade, mount it on the side of the vehicle, drop down the book tables, put the books out there. There was a small crew of devotees that went with him and were part of his Harinam program. They would set up on the inside, they would chant Hare Krishna, and there you go. So he had this perfect arrangement by which he wasn't on the streets, he wasn't blocking anything, he wasn't illegally congregating or causing a parade. He was in a parked vehicle that was paying at the meter, and in this way he would go out every day for hours on the streets of New York City and do bhajan. This was his program. It was amazing. I believe this was the beginning of the roots of what would eventually become his 24-hour kirtan program in Vrindavan. During those days, Aindra lived very, very simply. He actually lived in a storage closet in the back basement of the Skirmerhorn temple. There was 2 halves to the building, and then the basement level, and in the back of the second half was a storage closet that was, I don't know, maybe 10 feet by 5 feet, or maybe 12 feet by 8 feet, something no bigger than that for sure. And he lived in there with all of his equipment and all of his paraphernalia, and no window or anything, and this is where he performed his devotional service, his chanting of his rounds, and he would serve the deities, and then he would go out all day and do this Harinam. It was so amazing. Very simple, very austere, dressed very, very simply. After some time, I believe it was in 1985, there was some external circumstances that took place that involved his leaving New York. But I think the internal circumstances were that Krishna and Balaram were drawing him to Vrindavan for their service, for their bhajan. So he went to Vrindavan, and when he arrived in Vrindavan, he settled for a bit, but he decided he wanted to inaugurate one program, or re-inaugurate one program of Srila Prabhupada's. In 1975, Srila Prabhupada had arranged for 24-hour kirtan. And this kirtan program was to be something that was a part of the Krishna Balaram Mandir. And for whatever reason, I wasn't there, I don't know the history, it didn't last. When Aindra went to India in 1985, he decided in 1986 he wanted to re-inaugurate this 24-hour kirtan program, that this is what he wanted to do. So in the beginning, he actually had a few people that were paid some maintenance costs to do the kirtan. They were given some rupees to sit and do the chanting like this and that. But of course, very quickly he realized that this was nothing more than a business transaction and there was no bhakti in it. So he took it over and began to develop what we know now is the real spiritual nature of the 24-hour kirtan program. And from there, it grew and it grew, and over the next, 24 years, we know the 24-hour kirtan to be synonymous with Vrindavan. You go to India, you Vrindavan temple, you know there'll be 24-hour kirtan go on. And many devotees go simply to take part in that. We have many devotees from Alachua that go simply to stay there for months and take part in his kirtan. This was the life and soul of Aindra Prabhu. Actually, Aindra was very, very austere. He was very, very devoted to the holy name. And he was very kind to others. Now, not to be misunderstood, he did have a temper. I mean, he did have red hair, and he could have red-hot temper when it was necessary. But in general, he was very kind to all the devotees. He was genuinely attentive to those that performed kirtan with him. He was always eager to share the Mahaprasadam from his deities. When he stayed in Vrindavan for some time, I don't know what year it was, he had his beautiful little Gaurnitai deities with deity of Prabhupada and Vitthalanatha. Small, maybe this big, like that, yeah, small. After some time, he acquired neemwood Gaurnitai deities that were as tall as he is, maybe even taller. And these were put in his room. Now, Aindra's room was a unique thing. The entire room was done in cow dung, as if it were a thatched hut, with decorations in cow dung. Just amazing. And he had a beautiful altar in there. And he started out with his Gaurnitai deities and the big Gaurnitai deities, which he would literally pick them up and lay them down in bed every night. And he had a few Shalagram Shilas. After some time, his collection of Shalagram Shilas that he worshipped with great care grew to several hundred, even into the thousands. This is a known fact, and if you go on to some of the sites where his pictures are, you can see these. During this time in Vrindavan, he began to perform the Chaturmasya vows. Now, I've described these Chaturmasya vows at different times throughout our broadcasts, and he was very strict about them. There's a type of Chaturmasya where you don't just do the 4 months where you skip milk, yogurt, spinach, milk yogurt, and urd dal, but where you do what's called Chandra Vrata, where according to the day of the moon, you take that many mouthfuls of food. And Aindra was very well known to perform this austerity, that according to the first day of the moon, 1 bite of food. According to the 15th day of the moon, 15 bites of food. Very strict, like that for 4 months. And due to these austerities, due to his intensity of chanting the holy name, and due to performing all this in Vrindavan, he developed great Shakti, great potency. Very, very wonderful. He was very well respected in Braj as a genuine sadhu. You know, Vrindavan residents, they've seen many Americans come to Vrindavan and live in Vrindavan and live a very comfortable lifestyle, living on Western money in an Indian environment. Aindra wasn't like that. Aindra lived very simply. His clothes were whatever he had. He didn't have fancy kurtas and this and that. He simply wore some type of a lungi with a cloth on top. Mostly, he never wore sewn cloth. I was actually told one devotee was with him one time. He had gotten on a rickshaw to go somewhere, and when he got off, he simply held up his cloth, no pockets, and the rickshaw wala simply accepted because they knew he was the genuine thing. So his clothing, his habit was very simple, but the way that he would dress, Radha Shyam Sundar, the intimacy and the devotion by which he would offer his service to Radha Shyam Sundar and dressing him was just amazing. The love that he felt for the deities and the dressing style that he gave was just so incredible. Any of you that have had the good fortune to see, I think there's one video out on YouTube or on Facebook somewhere of his dressing of the deities, and it's just absolutely amazing. Manjesh is always expert. He's already pulled up 2 sites with pictures of the Shilas and posted them in the chat room. You can also, I'm sure in just a moment or two, we'll have pictures of the link to Aindra dressing Radhasham Sundar. That's your cue, Manjesh. You have to get on it now. So Aindra had, as I mentioned, he had at least a couple of thousand Shilas. And it wasn't that he didn't take care of them nicely. He took care of them expertly. I have tried to acquire certain Shilas over the course of my devotional service, and so I went to Aindra one time and asked him, I said, I'm looking for a particular Shila, and I know that you have several hundred. I was wondering if you would give in charity to me such and such Shila. And he said to me with a smile and such sincerity in his eyes, he said, but these are my children. How can I give them away? And this was his mood, that these were his children and he was looking after them. And any time there were Shilas that were abandoned or that no one could any longer worship, they would bring them and give them to heaven. He would take care of them like this. So this was how he worshipped them. His personal room that he lived in was divided in 2/3, into a 2/3 section and a 1/3 section. 1/3 was where he lived and had his little bit of recording equipment for his CDs and his musical instruments and what little bit of cloth and clothing he had. And the other 2/3 was the altar and the deities and everything there. So in this way, his room was a temple in and of itself. Very nice like that. We mentioned that he had left his body, and it was his desire, he had spoken about it before leaving this world, that when he did die, he wanted to be cremated on the banks of the Jamuna, and then some of his ashes brought back and placed near his deities. So this desire has been fulfilled by the management of the Vrindavan temple. Actually, on the evening of the 17th of July, he departed that morning. And on the evening of the 17th of July, his body was returned to the devotees from the Mathura hospital. And they dressed his body properly, bathing him in sacred water, dressed his body properly, and then brought him down in kirtan procession and circumambulated the deities of Krishna Balaram, Radhasham Sundar, and Gaurnitai 3 times. Then they took the body of Aindra to the Samadhi of Srila Prabhupada and presented his final darshan to Srila Prabhupada in the Samadhi. Then over 1,000 devotees went on pilgrimage throughout Vrindavan. They took the body of Aindra to all the different 6 Goswami temples, not into the temples, but to the doors of those temples. Then they went on procession to the Jamuna River. And at the Jamuna River, several devotees took his body on the palanquin he was being carried on the stretcher and submerged him into the Jamuna River and bathed him in this way. The funeral pyre was built there on the banks of the Jamuna, many devotees bringing different types of woods, different holy wood and different wood that would burn properly for the fire, and then his body was placed there. And then in great reverence, the funeral fire was lit. And Aindra's final wish was fulfilled. There's a wonderful video on YouTube of the last rites of Aindra. I encourage all devotees to go to YouTube and see that. So in this way, the devotees greatly observed this activity. Kirtan was going on the entire time. And as the funeral pyre burned down and the body was cremated properly, it got to be late, but the devotees didn't want to leave. Attending there were many of his god brothers and dear friends. His Holiness Mahanidhi Swami was there. The head pujari for Krishna Balaram Mandir, Mukunda Dutt, was there. Prem Kishore Prabhu was there. Bhuvaneshwar Prabhu was there. Panchagoda, the temple president, was there. So many devotees like this were all there. And everyone relishing being able to be there for the final rites, cremation of this wonderful devotee, this king of Kirtan, the emperor of Kirtan, as he's been referred to in recent days. So to wrap this up, I'd like to read an offering that was posted by B.B. Govinda, another one of our great ISKCON Kirtan men, and read what he has written on the departure of Aindra Prabhu. He starts off with the verse from Rupa Goswami's Padyavali. May Krishna's holy name, which is a reservoir of all transcendental happiness, the destroyer of Kali Yuga's sins, the most purifying of all purifying things, the saintly person's food as he traverses the path to the spiritual world, the pleasure garden where the voices of the greatest saints, philosophers, and poets play, the life of the righteous, and the seed of the tree of religion bring transcendental happiness to you all. B.B. Govinda writes, this was a favorite verse of Srila Akanchana Krishnadas Babaji Maharaj, which he always sang in his Mangalacharana before chanting the Hare Krishna mantra. Just a little background. Akanchana Krishnadas Babaji was one of Srila Prabhupada's godbrothers, and he was known simply as the Babaji of the Holy Name. He performed bhajans at the sannyas initiation of Srila Prabhupada in Mathura. And he was a great friend of ISKCON, and additionally he was a very close personal friend of B.B. Govinda Maharaj when he was Ayodhyapati Prabhu and cooking at the temple in Vrindavan and relishing himself the holy name. So he was a friend and heard this verse of Akanchana Krishnadas Babaji spoken many times. He continues, I thought of this verse today when I was thinking about you. Yes, Aindra Prabhu, I was thinking about you all throughout the day. This verse glorifies the name of God and blesses all of us with transcendental auspiciousness, the awakening of pure devotional service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, to His grace. In the sense, this verse is the mission statement of a dedicated and selfless kirtanir like yourself. B.B. Govinda Maharaj then goes on to list the principles of this mission statement. Number 1, you gave your life in dedication with conviction. Remember we were reading earlier, sincerity of purpose. You gave your life in dedication with conviction for sharing the ocean of transcendental happiness of Sri Krishna Nam Sankirtan with countless souls suffering the miseries of this material existence. Number 2, you dedicated your life to present the only and final solution for ending the sins and tribulations of Kali Yuga through the performance of Sri Krishna Nam Sankirtan. Number 3, you humbly and mercifully cried out with a bleeding heart to humanity to purify their existence throughout accepting the association of Sri Krishna through the performance of Sri Nam Sankirtan. Number 4, you were always the chief server of the luscious feast of Sri Krishna Nam Sankirtan to all the pilgrims who are on the path back to Goloka Vrindavan. Number 5, in your kirtans you were the tour guide to the transcendental pleasure gardens where the faithful can rest while hearing the sweetest voices of the greatest saints extol the glories of Sri Krishna Nam Sankirtan and the exquisite glories of Krishna Bhakti. Number 6, by liberally bestowing the holy name, you presented the real, eternal existence in the lives of the righteous and saintly Vaisnava devotees of the Lord. Number 7, as a humble gardener, you planted the seed of the tree of religion deep within the hearts of millions of people throughout the world, while sitting in front of the deities in Sri Vrindavan. And number 8, and by showing the true life of humble servant of Krishna's holy name you invoked eternal auspiciousness for all humanity. Aindra, Kali Yuga is dark, and it becomes darker day by day. Krishna Nam is the brilliantly blazing torch in the darkness of the Kali Yuga night. You, my dear godbrother, have been one of the great torch-bearing sons of His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada, of our Guru Paramparar, and of Sri Chaitanya Dev and his associates. Aindra, I bow down to you, praying for your unconditional Vaishnava grace. Please bless me that one day I may chant the holy names of Sri Krishna with a pure heart, with the smallest fraction of love and the single-minded dedication you have always shown us. My brother, all glories to you. You have gone to Radhesham. You have gone to Srila Prabhupada. Please tell them that I also wish to come, but it will take much longer to correct the situation of my heart. We are feeling sorry that you are not here, and we are feeling joy at your success. Well done! Well commenced! Well executed, Aindra! You focused only on Harinam, Thakurji Seva, and Bhagwat. You have made the grade, and we already miss you. If by chance there is the internet up there, or even a postcard, please stay in touch, because we all love you and miss you, and direly need your support to reach that holy abode. Please say little prayers on our behalf to the young important citizens there. Please pull some strings and get us there too. Aindra, until our next meeting, may the love, peace, and grace of Sri Krishna Sankirtan bathe your precious soul. Dasho Shmi, Bibi Govinda Swami. So we finish there this evening with these two wonderful devotees and their dedicated lives to Srila Prabhupada, and with Aindra Prabhu particularly, who has become synonymous with Sri Vrindavan Dham by his service to the holy name. So I want to just mention that this broadcast tonight will be the last broadcast for the next few weeks. I'm going to be out of town doing some traveling. I'm going to Poland to take part in the festivities over there, and I'll be out of town a little bit other than that. So we're going to send an email out near the middle of August. End of August is when we'll pick back up. So we're going to take a summer sabbatical like we did last year, be off the air for a few weeks, but I've already been discussing with Dhruva Maharaj Prabhu, my mentor in these regards, and I revealed to him my plan for the opening broadcast when we come back at the end of the summer, and he thinks it's a great idea. So I'm not going to give it away, but I'll tell you all this. It's going to be wonderful. So I'll close tonight praying that you take shelter of the holy name, take shelter of the Vaishnava, and always remember to serve the devotees. Thus ends another chapter in our lives of the Vaishnavacharyas. I'm your host, Chaturatma Das. Hare Krishna.